doing that. So pivotal response training should be the next slide. This is another established evidence-based practice. It's had lots of research studies. This was developed by a husband and wife team, the Kegels, both behavioral psychologists. Again, like I said, almost all the evidence-based practices are using the principles of applied behavioral analysis as the foundation for teaching. But this one targets, specific behaviors. The reason it's called pivotal response training is it targets specific behaviors that once they're learned, they have a big impact on the ease of learning a whole lot of other skills. So that's the pivotal piece. They learn this skill, it facilitates them being able to do a whole lot of other skills as well. There's a lot of focus on motivation within pivotal response training. So if you looked at that IBI video, the motivation to match was really so he could get the piano for 2 minutes. Wouldn't have worked for me, I can tell you. But what pivotal response training looks at is this a skill that is intrinsically motivating for that person to learn? So focus on the things that motivate people first, that they're interested in, and that will get them something valuable, useful to them as the starting point of learning. It also focuses a lot on initiation. The individual with ASD learning to initiate. And this is so important because we tend to teach people with autism to be responders rather than initiators. And it is one of the recognized problems in intensive behavioral intervention. Even though it's one of the most researched evidence-based practices, even after years of intensive behavioral intervention and great strides forward for an individual with ASD in terms of the skills they've learned, the difficulty that they still have is initiating, because the whole process of that teaching is the therapist initiates and the child responds. There are techniques that they introduce with some kids of trying to reverse the roles so that they learn to be initiators, but this research does show that of all the skills they learn, initiation remains low and problematic even after years of IBI therapy. So the nice thing about pivotal response training is it focuses on the child learning to initiate from the beginning. So for example, one of the skills that is a pivotal behavior is question asking. Interesting, eh? You don't really think about teaching kids with autism to ask questions, but if, or adults, a child or an adult with ASD can learn to ask questions, think about it. It opens the doors to all kinds of social interactions that can generate mutual interests and can develop into friendships and relationships out of that. So a child that goes up and just starts saying, "I'd like green balloons in the shape of elephants," the interaction with his peers is pretty well closed down at that point. They can either, unless he's lucky enough to find someone else who likes that. But if he can say, "What do you have there? What are you playing? What are you doing with that game?" It invites a reciprocal response that opens up a whole lot of other areas of learning for the individual. I thought that was an interesting one that they focus on. All right. Communication approaches. First thing to understand is, we're going to highlight these three that are at the top of the page, but first thing to understand is that there's no single right or wrong communication system for people with ASD. Always a communication system is devised individually, and we need to recognize that both expressive and receptive communication is impaired in ASD. So both their ability to communicate to us, but also their receptive abilities to comprehend and take in what we're saying to them. Even for those who speak well, communication is still impaired in comprehension and expression. And for those who don't speak well or who don't speak at all, they will always find another way to communicate. So important to recognize behavior is communication. People who can't speak will usually communicate through their behavior. And in fact, most of you who are wives, at least my wife would say, yeah, that's how you communicate too. When you're not feeling well, you don't tell me you're not feeling well. You grumble and groan and refuse to get off the couch or something. So people will use their behavior to communicate. So generally, a total communication approach is the most widely accepted as ideal, which means using a combination of communication systems such as any that are included here: speech, signs, symbols, picture exchange, augmentative devices, picture boards, choice boards, and so on, computer systems, any of these in combination. Can give people with an ASD the ability to communicate with others. Receptive systems, also to help them comprehend the communication from others. So that's what we talked a little bit about the visuals and how those can help. Social scripts, we'll look at that one in a little more detail. First then boards. First we'll do this, then we'll do that. Anybody use those? They're like magic for kids that don't want to stop doing one thing they're involved in and move on to another. Introduce first then, and they easily make that choice. So there are lots of types of augmentative and alternative communication applications, and they started out being used for people with other disabilities and have been adapted or applied to people who can't use their voices to communicate in ASD as well. And so there is research that demonstrates effective use of some of these systems for people with ASD. And here's just you've got in your handouts just a few. So this is just a Mayer Johnson picture communication board where they're just pointing at them. Those can also be done in a booklet form. There are lots of electronic devices now as well, and lots of ASD-specific apps that help people communicate as well. So those are just a few examples. The iPad is also used. And I just heard about one recently that often the trouble with some of those devices is that when an individual goes to a specific setting, like a restaurant or a bank or whatever, they have to find the communication sentences, the applications for that setting, and that can be difficult for them to actually locate the right phrases that they need to push the button, and then the machine says it for them. A company has just devised one that uses a GPS system that recognizes when the person goes into a bank, it automatically brings up all the bank statements that they would push to talk to the teller. Or when they go into a restaurant, based on the GPS finding that statement. Yeah, in a restaurant, yeah, it tells them, gives them those ones. So every day there are new apps being devised that are useful. In fact, has it happened yet? The autism chapter is running it's this Saturday. Is it full? Yeah. Okay. All right, shouldn't it? Hopefully we'll run another one that was bad, a lot of positive response. So Autism Ontario is running a workshop on autism apps. This Saturday it's full, but they're going to run another one shortly. So you can watch for that. We'll send it out through the list. All right, let's move on to another specific communication approach that is considered evidence-based, the picture exchange communication system. Again, especially valuable because it teaches initiation and is used more for expression and interaction than just labeling. This one was developed by a psychologist in the ASD field, Dr. Andrew Bondi. He's a behavioral psychologist in collaboration with his wife, who is a speech pathologist in the ASD field. So how great, what a combination. And I think what they did for the field with the PEC system moved us forward leaps and bounds. In a nutshell, what the PEC system looks like is when a child wants something, instead of just waving at it or pointing into it, you take the picture of that item or a picture symbol of that item, put it into their hand and model it. They give you the symbol and you take it like you never have known what they wanted before and say, oh, you want juice, and you give them the juice. That's the essence of beginning the picture exchange system. From the very beginning, they're learning to initiate communication with other people. Now, I've been in the autism field for a long time, more than 30 years. So if I go way back to the beginning, the horrible things we used to do, we spent weeks, months, years sometimes, trying to get people to show that they knew that this picture represented this item. It's like the matching that you saw there, essentially. That this picture of the jug of juice meant the juice of item, the juice itself. And we would practice and practice, and you know, some people never could show that they reliably recognized the picture as that item. With the PEC system, what they learned is, you don't have to do that. They will learn that that symbol represents the juice in the process of giving it to you to get the juice, and they learn it very quickly. Now the reality is, don't do this, but the reality is you could have a picture of a potato and you gave them the juice, they would learn to exchange the potato for juice. But of course we don't want to do that. We want them to learn the real picture that goes with that item. And then it grows and grows, and they can learn to actually put things. There are 9 stages in the PEC system. But it's wonderful to see that interaction and that initiation begin with young children. And the research has actually shown that 80% of preschoolers, not older children necessarily, but preschoolers who start with the PECs, who are nonverbal, after a year on the PEC system, are speaking. Not necessarily fluently, but they're speaking. They're using words. And they're using the words for the items that they've been seeing in the picture with the word printed under it for that whole year. So 80%, that is huge, moving kids forward.